Hi everyone, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks. And one of my most asked questions of all time has to be, QB, how should I spend bonds in World of Tanks? So firstly, let me clarify that it depends on what your enjoyment of the game is. Some people, for example, would hate to spend their bonds on bond equipment because it's not a new tank. You've worked so hard to be able to get all of these bonds and you want to have something fun to be able to get with them. And like having tiny little micro advantages on some of your favorite tanks might be so boring for what is meant to be one of the currencies that we all grind event, and we just grind our tier 9 premium or tier 10 tanks to be able to get. So that's definitely a caveat that I would like to add before I discuss what I would recommend spending bonds on in this video. But for me personally, your goal should be in World of Tanks to firstly get 1, preferably 2 if not 3 tier 8 or tier 9 premium tanks that you enjoy or are just good tools for making credits. And you can get vehicles like the Object 252U inside the bond store, you can get the T103 inside the bond store and the Guard inside the bond store. And if you're willing to spend some credits, now that the speed governors are gone, even the KV5 can be a lot of fun inside the bond store as well. There are other tanks you can be able to get your hands on. Those are just some starting vehicles without turning this into like a 10-minute discussion on all of them, which I just did towards the end of last year anyway. So that would be my first goal as a player. Your bonds can be used if you don't have money and you don't want to spend money on World of Tanks to be able to get all of the privileges of having tier 8 or tier 9 premium tanks, so you can grind credits, you can fix your crews with them, and you can be able to get some extra crew training, and it just makes the whole journey so much easier. But definitely the main benefit for having those 2 or 3 premium tanks is so that you can have access to really big credits inside the game. And when you've got one that you've sucked out in, you can play a second one. If you sucked out in that, then you can play your third one while the first 2 are locked in battle. And if you've got 3 tanks locked in battle, then maybe you're playing just a little bit too aggressive, right? So the next way that I would invest bonds is making your favorite tanks, or maybe your best premium tanks, have the best equipment as well. Having bond rammers, bond vents, bond durabilities, bond turbos, if you can be able to get your hands on them, but those aren't freely available, but available in modes such as Onslaught, for example, are fantastic. Get your most OP tank, you know, get your kind of, if it's an XM57, goodness gracious, can't believe I'm saying that, your BZ176, just go to T56, maybe some of your tier 9 premiums like an Object 752, all of those vehicles, and get bond equipment on them, because those are your bread and butter credit makers, right? And if you don't get bored playing the same tank to be able to make credits, it can be a fantastic way to really have a tool that is great, but then you put bond equipment on it and it's just brokenly good. And if you're grinding those tanks, you might as well have the best tank that you can possibly get to be able to make credits as well, right? So that is the next best way, in my opinion, to use bond equipment. After that, and keeping in mind the caveat that I had at the first part of the video, where I discussed that for a lot of people, getting equipment and so on and so forth will be really boring, the next thing that I would do is not collect any of the other non-premium trash that's inside the regular bond store. Don't get yourself a 268 version 5, unless, again, you want to have a little bit of fun, and you don't want to get something better, I guess. Don't get like an M60, even though it's fun for me. I like the M60 and the 121B, and definitely don't get the FV215B. Get yourself this. Get yourself the Concept. The Concept is just an absolute god tier, tier 9. Now, it's not premium, it's not going to make you bonds, it's not going to make you credits, but what it will do is make you just have such a tremendous advantage compared to a lot of vehicles. This thing is an absolute chad of World of Tanks. Great turret armor, great frontal armor. It does have some weaknesses and nuances that you'll have to get used to, but with 10 degrees of gun depression and amazing mobility, this thing can go at 45 before you get the field mod on the tank. And I believe the field mod on this vehicle increases its top speed limit to 49 without a turbo. And it's got over 20 power to weight ratio, so it's basically as fast as a medium. It's just, it's perfect within that regard. Now, I have 2 builds for this tank. One, I prefer to use vents, aiming, and a gun rammer. I don't really like vert stabs on this tank. Even though I've missed a few shots this game, I prefer to have the improved accuracy, because the gun handling is good, but the the relatively poor aspect about this tank is the accuracy, considering the caliber of the gun. So I like to be have more precision-based marksmanship by taking the aiming device over vert stabs, which I personally like to prioritize on this tank. But a lot of you out there will do better with the vert stabs. But my second build on this tank, I will be taking a turbo. And when you get a turbo on this tank, your new top speed limit is like 53 to 55 kilometers an hour, depending on what kind of a turbo you want to use. So you're basically like a relatively fast tier 10 medium at that regard, but you're down as a tier 9 heavy. You've got a low profile, you've got 10 degrees of gun depression to work all of the ridges, and you're just this all-round force to be able to get wherever you want. And this man squad probably doesn't expect. He's got 2 marks, so he should know what a concept is, right? He's got to be a good player, but we're just able to absolutely hound them down. Again, without a turbo, and definitely a great candidate for an experimental turbo. Level 3 on this vehicle is what I would also strongly consider that you should get. And this man's trying to get away, but they just can't. You can't get away from the concept. It's just this absolute force to be able to come after you. So this was a very casual 9,000 combined in under 6 minutes while destroying a third of the enemy team against tier 10 tanks. But don't just take my gameplay for it. Now we're going to be checking out HeesHealer. And HeesHealer is not really going to need a healer in this game because they're just so darn good. They're rocking their Concept 1B, and they've got themselves some sweaty equipment on this tank, unlike me. I know, Uncle QuickyBaby has one of the most overpowered tanks, if not the most overpowered tank at tier 9, and doesn't put bond equipment on it? What am I doing wrong? So HeesHealer is going for a different build here, getting that bond rammer in on this tank to be able to maximize that rate of fire, but also taking bond vert stabs. They're going to have great gun handling on this tank, but they're going to have significantly worse accuracy, 10% worse accuracy than I would with a vent aiming build on this tank. But to have that durability as well means that not only is this tank fast to be able to get into position, we're seeing it just bomb along at like 49 kilometers an hour because of that field mod 50, because clearly HeesHealer has also got the new engineer skill on the driver. So this thing, even without a turbo, is able to get into a dip at the same kind of speed as the mediums. But remember, it's going to have all of that turret armor, it's going to have all of that upper hull armor, and it's going to have all of that gun depression to really be able to just work in this scenario. HeesHealer is also playing with an IS-32. That's an absolutely great tier 9. I love the IS-32, one of my faves. And HeesHealer is going to town on the relatively new Contradictious. And Contradictious's weak point is looking very juicy right now. And HeesHealer has fantastic marksmanship to be able to just pinpoint that. And that Contradictious, I'm not sure it was worth the $50 you spent on it, at least if you're going to play it like that. So this is clearly 2 power players. HeesHealer is actually playing with I Am Quicker. I like that name, that's good. Hopefully I Am Quicker is going to be able to live up to the name and absolutely crunch through the enemy team here. And this is just the Concept 1B in its bread and butter position. You saw me using the quintessential Live Oaks map for a tank with 10 degrees of gun depression and good turret armor to just pick apart our opponents one by one using that awesome ridgeline presence that the Concept 1B has. And HeesHealer is going to do the same thing. They're going to get forwards into a hold down position and just be an absolute monster to contend with. Another thing that I didn't mention about this tank that is great is look at that standard pen. APCR 1,478 meters a second shell velocity. So that means that you can snipe at moving targets as well in this vehicle with its great gun handling. Unfortunately, HeesHealer aims just a few pixels too high there. Remember that the i7 will have well-angled armor in that scenario, so he needs to aim a little bit lower. Doesn't make that mistake twice. And this is just hold down tanks, grinding a tank that frankly should have pushed all of these players, instead of doing what the right thing was to do, to go into the dip and to push the concept, instead just sat there and got farmed. And quite a lot of players who play World of Tanks, they are deers. They get caught in the headlights. They freeze. They don't fight in that scenario. They don't put themselves in the situation which is actually going to matter. And even with HeesHealer now up to 6,000 combined, you know this is going to be a good game. right? Not just because they're on 6,000 combined, but more importantly, because their team is still down 2,000 hit points. So a little bit of a misplay there. Maybe an intuition switch would have allowed HeesHealer to be able to finish off the Scorpion in a single shell. But that's just a micro advantage that you could do depending on whether you are taking skills like intuition on your loader. This vehicle, I would definitely prioritize intuition. Not for the HE switches, but anytime a tank has AP and heat, or in this case APCR, which functions the same way as AP and heat, those two shells have so much difference, right? The heat rounds, useless against soft walls, fences, spaced armor, that kind of stuff. The AP rounds will be better there, but those heat just so good for either surfaces that you can't overmatch but are still thin that you can pen up to 85 degrees of angled armor, and also just great for flat armor, and over distances the heat rounds won't lose any penetration. Although the penetration drop-off on a tank like this is only 10 millimeters over 500 meters, so with the 2 degrees of normalization those APCR shells will have, they're still going to be pretty darn good at long range against any kind of angling, which most tanks are going to have about 2 degrees of angling, any kind of angle that you're going to shoot them. Alright, so HeesHealer, having grinded off the northern flank, is instead going to turn around and deal with the vehicles coming up behind. And this is just how responsive the concept can be. Other heavy tanks don't have the power to wait, and they don't have the mobility, the top speed limit, to be able to change complete sides of the map to be able to jump on these opportunities. But the Concept 1B does. And so because it's able to do that, not only does it just get free farm, it also is able to reinforce flanks that otherwise other heavies couldn't be able to reinforce and influence the battle that way, which is why this vehicle, I believe, has the best win ratio of any of the tier 9 heavies. Now, you could argue that one of the reasons why it has that best win ratio is because the only way to get your hands on this tank is to have 16,000 bonds and to get silver in Onslaught, which is the current most competitive version of World of Tanks. Now, getting silver, it's still a tricky thing. I'd say you probably need to be kind of like a 50 or a 49% kind of average win ratio player at tier 10. And if you're able to get 50% wins at tier 10, you are not an average gamer. You are a decent gamer at that. But if you get stuck into Onslaught and you do put some time in, I just want to interrupt myself to say that one thing I learned the other day is that like supposed weak point on front of the 7032, which looks like it should be a weak point because it will have a flatter armor, is not actually a weak point. It's not modeled. But I digress, back to what I was saying. So, you know, if you're like 49-50% win ratio player, if you go and play hundreds of games and you're willing to learn the meta, then it will help you out. My top tips for Onslaught are as follows. Number 1, play tanks that you are good at. If you are good in a tank, you're most likely going to make it work. Secondly, do take into account that tank abilities significantly change the way that tanks work. You know, your tank destroyers like the Foch B, they can roll in, take a lot of damage with their wind up, and then be able to get that health back afterwards. So you have to relearn the game. Onslaught is 80% like the random queue, but it's still almost completely different with it being 7 versus 7. And all of the differences that come with it. So you're gonna have to be able to get good there from that regard. I'll tell you what is getting good is that HeesHealer actually repaired their fuel tank there, showing just really high level stuff there. A lot of people don't repair their fuel tank, but to have that calm composure to repair the fuel tank, to be able to make sure that they don't get it set on fire because they're not using a fire extinguisher, just great stuff there. The fuel tank is just as important as the ammo rack in a way within that regard, with the kind of danger that can come from subsequent hits. So in Onslaught as well, one thing I'd recommend to all of you, even if don't get stuck into a loop of feeling like how to say this, you question why you lose, and then that makes it so that you play worse, you tilt out, or you don't commit to the situation. The most important thing in Onslaught is to try and commit while the game is winnable, to try and have an impact early. And that's as simple as knowing what important positions are available and pursuing them immediately in the game. Of course, depending on what kind of a tank that you're playing. Now, if you progress those early positions with the correct tanks, and you're willing to learn and just accept that you deserve to be where you are and try not to get too frustrated at your team, if you objectively make better impacts in your battle, do more damage, get more kills, accept where you've made mistakes, try and learn from them, you will progress in Onslaught. It will most likely take you hundreds of battles inside Onslaught to progress this, through the ranks, but you will learn. The only thing I would question is if you're the kind of Onslaught player who sometimes goes up to silver and then drops all the way back down to bronze and then sometimes goes even lower than bronze. If you're literally dropping more than, say, 1 or 2 letters, if you're dropping more than like a couple of 100 points, it's most likely because you're tilted and you're not playing consistently in your games. If that's the case, then I would thoroughly recommend to maybe take a step back, take a breather, and maybe come back to it a different day. Tilt inside competitive video games, of which Onslaught is a real legitimate thing. It happens to me. I've definitely got better at it, but it's taken me like thousands of games of Onslaught to kind of realize why the battles are being lost and just to accept that and to move on into the next one. And this season in Onslaught as well, one of the best things is that you can do all of the missions whenever you want. You don't have to do them each week. And so if you do 30 missions, which will take you a good amount of time, but you're going to have like 4, 5, 6 weeks to be able to do it, you're going to get yourself a piece of Bond equipment as well. So while I personally still think that Onslaught is way worse, a really bad version of World of Tanks compared to the random queue, and I really wish Wargaming would still return it to 15 versus 15, and I don't think that people should be able to choose the correct tank for the map. I think that people should have to deal with awkwardness and try and play bad tanks for the maps that they get on. I digress. I could go on for hours about Onslaught and how I feel about it. All I'm here to do today is to try and let you know that if I had 16,000 bonds in World of Tanks and I was an average player at tier 10, this is the first tank that I would go for. Just what a massive game here for HeesHealer. Got themselves 2,116 base experience, 10,500 damage, 2,000 assistance, and destroyed half of the enemy team in this tier 10 matchup. And made, yeah, a good amount of credits as well, even though spending a lot on ammunition and resupplying at full cost, but that was because of holiday ops. So HeesHealer, thank you so much for uploading your epic game on the QuickyBaby.what-record website and showing the community why they should consider dropping that hefty 16,000 bonds on the concept. And I guess the only other argument is should you get the Kampfpanzer 50T? Well, if you do have yourself a Chieftain prototype, for example, then you've kind of got concept-like gameplay. I'm not saying the Chieftain prototype is as good, but because you can make credits and bonds while having a similar kind of playstyle, then maybe in theory you should get the Kampfpanzer. But I think if I had to make a decision, I'd say the concept does still trump the Kampfpanzer. Anyway, ladies and gents, boys and girls, that was it for today. Really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you hated it, give it a thumbs down. And let me know if you are going to try and get silver inside Onslaught to try and pick up one of these 2 tanks. Or do you think just 16,000 bonds is just ludicrous, and how are you meant to save up that amount? And if you're watching this video as it goes live on Sunday, Tech Tree Showcase time. Let's go. A whole new British line is out. Let's play up towards the can opener so I can share my entire experience of all of the new British vehicles to maybe give you some tips and tricks along the way and to see if they're worth grinding. So really looking forward to seeing you all live right now. And as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.